Wake Island Atoll was only 21 feet above sea level, but was big enough to have an airfield. It was an insignificant, obscure spit of land barely sticking out of the middle of the Pacific Ocean. But it would be the site of the first American victory of World War II, as well as a terrible defeat. James enlisted in the U.S. Navy in August 1940, eventually becoming an airplane mechanic, and was sent to Wake Island in October 1941. War with Japan was becoming inevitable, and Wake was one of the bases within the Japanese path. James joined 450 Marines and 67 other Navy personnel defending the island, including Private First Class William Schumacher from Pontiac, Michigan. Schumacher was a machine gunner with Battery B, 1st Marine Defense Battalion. He was sent to Wake Island in August 1941 and was one of the first defenders on the island. There were also almost 1,200 civilian workers present. They were expanding the airfields along with building other projects.
On December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor was attacked, throwing the United States into war against the Japanese. Hours later, on Wake Island, which was on the other side of the international date line and was then December 8th, was attacked just as fiercely by the Japanese as Pearl Harbor was.
The bombers were able to destroy 2/3 of the American aircraft on the ground, leaving just 4 functioning planes. A few of the Japanese planes were hit by anti-aircraft fire. The bombing continued until the morning of December 11th, when a Japanese fleet showed up to land troops and take the island. The defenders let the fleet move within 4,500 yards and then opened fire.
The steel nerves of the defenders of Wake Island are just unimaginable. They waited until the very last minute, watching these ships grow ever closer until they opened fire with their coastal guns and gave that task force everything that they could handle.
One Japanese destroyer was sunk and many other ships were damaged. The few remaining American planes sunk another destroyer as well. The fleet turned back without putting any men on the island. Japanese bombing continued every day after that. An American plan was put together to relieve the defenders of Wake. The task force eventually sailed, but the renewed Japanese fleet beat the Americans to Wake. On the morning of December 23rd, the Japanese resumed their attack, this time landing soldiers on the island.
These men had already resigned themselves to the fact that they were not going to make it out of this. They were planning on fighting to the very last man, the very last ounce of energy they had to keep the Japanese from taking Wake Island.
Cox was on the beach manning a .30 caliber machine gun fighting off the landing. Despite being wounded, he kept fighting. Schumacher was also fighting as a section leader of heavy machine guns. He had a dual role with his section as they fought off Japanese troops on the ground and Japanese planes in the air. He would later be awarded the Bronze Star Medal for his bravery. As more Japanese troops landed and the American lines were squeezed, the orders were given to surrender.
Once they were all surrendered, they were gathered up at the airfield. They were stripped naked and made to stay there for hours and hours, in fact days. They didn't know what was going to happen to them. The Japanese had machine guns trained on them. They just figured that this was the end for them. However, the Japanese commander decided he didn't want to execute all of these prisoners. They were eventually loaded onto transports and taken first to China.
Here, Cox and Schumacher were put in a forced labor camp. They were forced to work building roads. Cox, Schumacher, and the other prisoners subsisted on cooked barley and barley soup. During his time as a prisoner, Cox lost 57 pounds, going from 165 down to 108 pounds. In August 1943, Cox and others were transferred to Osaka, Japan, and then Tokyo, Japan, where they worked in the steel mill and mines at Kawasaki. Cox later received a second Purple Heart Medal for a wound received when a Japanese guard beat him with a sledgehammer while working at Kawasaki.
These men were beaten if they didn't do their jobs. They were fed poorly, sometimes just a handful of rice, to work all day, sometimes 12 to 14 hours a day, During winter time, they just did not have the clothing and blankets, and so they suffered there as well, especially up in China. These men not only went through this horrible ordeal at Wake Island, but an even more horrible ordeal being POWs for almost 4 years.
The prisoners knew nothing about the atomic bombs being dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They only knew that they were being treated better. Then, on August 16, 1945, they heard about the Japanese surrender. The men dropped their picks and walked off the job. 2 days later, American bombers flew overhead and dropped food and clothing bundles for the prisoners. One bundle landed near Cox and burst open. It was full of chocolate bars. "I ate chocolate until I was sick," recalled Cox. Eventually, Cox was returned to the United States and sent to Grosse Ile Navy Base in Detroit. Although he had a harrowing experience, James remained in the U.S. Navy, retiring in 1961 as a chief boiler tech. Schumacher also returned and remained in the Marine Corps. He retired as a first lieutenant in 1959.
These men sacrificed and put their lives on the line, and that victory was in every single paper. It was all over the United States. These men were heroes of the utmost caliber.
William Schumacher passed away on August 31st, 1987. James Cox passed away on December 25, 1999, and was buried at the Fort Custer National Cemetery in Battle Creek, Michigan.